10 days before the release date, we submit it. 7 days later, we go, guys, can you just confirm that it's approved? Actually, we've rejected it. But you can appeal.
We hear so much about how you have to change, but not too much, because you're going to lose your community, and the community is everything. Change it, but don't change it. How did you handle that balance there?
You press 1, and it jumps from the 4K version back to the low-res version, and people are just blown away. You see the wonderful smile on their faces, because what they're seeing in 4K is what they remember it as, but then you show what it really looked like.
What was the surprise in the learnings? Maybe you need to think about your assets and your legacy and what you have, because you'll be dipping back into it at some point in the game.
Yeah. We write games that people buy or they don't buy, and if they do buy, we do well, and if they don't buy, we go bankrupt. It's as simple as that.
So again, chill. That's what it's about. It's been a great, great show. And you have to end it with something special, partially here in the surroundings, right? Because it is so chill. It is so cinematic cool. And I'm keeping with that. I'm going to talk about the drama of the industry, the cliffhangers, and who else better than you, Charles? Because I've heard it from our team. I was like, well, who do we have at the very end? And like the footnote to all of this has to be Charles. And they're right. They're right.
Well,
because
you, Peggy.
it's great to have you. I mean,
I
you really are like the industry personified. You started in 1981.
I started in 1981. I was very young then.
Okay, yes.
I mean, I'd only just left school, to be fair.
Yeah.
But a friend of mine, we were sponsored by Ford, and a friend of mine had just started a computer games company. And one day he said, you like telling stories. Why don't you come and write some adventures? So I did. And it was for a computer called the Sinclair ZX81. We had 1K of memory. Now, I know that this is obvious.
Yeah.
But let me say it anyway, because it makes me happy.
It makes the story is what makes
me
it.
happy. You know, my iPhone here has 256 million times as much memory as we had. And yet we wrote chess programs, we wrote in 1K. Unbelievable. It was an incredible era. And it was great. And in many ways, of course, the industry's changed profoundly. Mm-hmm. But in many ways, it just goes round and round in circles. It's
does
very
indeed.
exciting.
Because you're talking about games. There wasn't very much memory, but there was curiosity, there was imagination, and you did what you could with what you had. And it's amazing. You can innovate.
And the thing is that the constraints are such that you could innovate, and it was clearer. I think it was easier to innovate in many ways because it's not this blank bit of paper. With today's game engines, which are magnificent, you can do anything. Yeah. What people got really excited about was that you'd have you'd have the scan that the screen would go through at 50 hertz or 60 hertz, and then you'd have a little bit of a bit of processor time where it refreshed, and people would work out what you could do in that to push it slightly further. And I remember this was a few years later, but when Impossible Mission came out, and looking at it and realizing that actually we were so far behind, because what this American developer had done is they'd worked out that actually if you had colored sprites, which were blocky, and then monochrome sprites, and you put one on the other, you could actually get an incredibly good look. And it was that sort of innovation that just drove everything.
I love Scrappy. I really do. I love that because that shows that we're possible, what is possible and what we can do. And what you've done with Broken Sword, I mean, we're just chatting about it. When you think about it, established game and really loyal community. So you can be proud of that. We
have a wonderful, wonderful community. And I've just given a talk, and point and click is hard because people love point and clicks, but it is a small community. It is niche. So you have to be quite careful. And I decided there were two things that really made me launch into this quite expensive project of bringing Broken Sword from 1996 into 4K. And the first one was, I'm based in York in the north of England. And I came out of my office and I was a bit grumpy. It was wet and cold and I was late for something. And I locked the door, and behind me I heard a young woman talking to her son, a baby, and she said, "Darling, this is where Revolution, my company, is based. And I'm really looking forward to when you get old enough that I can play Broken Sword with you." So I kind of stopped and I looked at her, and it was a little bit dark and a little bit creepy, or rather it was a bit creepy for her, not for me. And then she recognized who I was, and she was really excited. And we keep getting reports from fans who talk about the fact that they played the games when they were young with their parents, and now they're playing with their children. So there's this extraordinary continuity and a passion. And the other thing is that I was at a conference called Adventure X, and somebody was talking about interfaces, and they said, of course, this is the Broken Sword interface. And it just struck me that actually what we really needed to do was do a root and branch review of what worked and what didn't work. And we did we put the game out, which is what everybody should do, if you're grown up, but we kind of assumed that everybody knew how point and click worked. And we put these out to random testers who didn't play adventure games. And the reviews came back and they were shocking. We were getting 50%. It's like on the App Store, we're getting 90%, but to random. And it was really interesting. And on one hand, it was profoundly depressing, but on the other, it was incredibly exciting because it's like, wow, we can do so much better. Yeah. And what we did is our team, who are brilliant, really threw themselves into, looking at the videos. We all looked at the videos. Why are people getting snagged on the interface? What's happening? Why are they doing this? And we iterated. And we then sent them out to new reviewers. And we went from the 50% up to 80%. And that was an incredibly exciting thing to do. And
so what did you learn? I mean, what was it they were getting snagged and stuck with?
Well, just simple things like what was happening was, particularly when you combine objects, the basic point and click is very simple. Of course, you just move the cursor around, and well, initially what would happen is in 1996 is only one icon would show you what the action is, but then that's the left click. But on the right click, you could examine, but nobody knew that you could examine. So it's a very simple thing, but we changed it so that there were two icons because we're now in 4K, so we've got plenty of space, which we didn't have before. So and everybody's been copying our interface from 30 years ago, and then when you combine objects, what we did is we looked to see how people were, and they'd get really close, and then they'd give up and they'd drop, and then they'd try again and they'd try again. So what we did is we just put a little snap in, so or like a little magnet to draw the cursor, just little things like that, and it made a huge difference. But the most important one, I think, is that you remember, you were a point and click fan.
Yeah.
So you remember with and we love Monkey Island, and we love the LucasArts games.
Oh yeah, Monkey Island. Oh my goodness.
But Monkey Island, the classic puzzle I remember is you've got to hypnotize a monkey with a banana. That kind of makes sense. Yeah. Then you put it in your pocket, and it becomes a monkey wrench. That's a little bit far-fetched, and in English we don't use the word monkey wrench anyway. So to undo a nut at the at the dam to let some water out, and certainly when I played it, and certainly when I played with my children, very quickly we'd get to the stage where we were just trying every combination, and that is not satisfactory. And what I found was that actually a number of people on Broken Sword were doing exactly that. They were giving up, and they were just using every single combination, which is exactly what I said was not what our games were not about. So the other element we've done is we've offered you can play the traditional mode, and that's fine. But in the story mode, it actually gives you just a little hint in the way that I was quite inspired by. I'm not a huge Candy Crush fan, but in Candy Crush, you go, oh my God, what do I do next? And a little sparkle. And it doesn't feel patronizing. It doesn't feel patronizing that it's just guiding you there, because time has passed. And so what we did is we just put just a little hint, because ultimately you play an adventure game to feel smart, and we want players to keep feeling smart. Yeah. So that was our.
That is actually very smart, because you want to guide people. You want them to have their journey, but you want them to make it. And sometimes, it's like, what do I do next? And that detracts from the fun. And that starts to feel confusing. And it's like, well, maybe I'm not sharp enough to play this in the first place.
Exactly. And then what they did is they because we gave hints. Sorry, we gave you could look up the solution, and they go, I've used the lipstick on the door. It doesn't work. I've just got no idea. I'm going to look up the solution. And then the magic is broken, because they'll just keep looking up the solution, because it's easier. They'll take the shortest route. But the game was was only available on PC in low res 640-400, and so we were able to bring it to PlayStation and Xbox and Switch. And the game on PlayStation 5 has a Metacritic of 89%. Like, this is a game that's 30 years old.
Wow,
it's crazy, isn't it? I mean, it's wonderful. It's wonderful, but also crazy.
And then people say the interface from you. So I mean, that's something. That's something. It means that it's timeless. That means that you can still bring it to a new audience and a new level, because that's what it's about, isn't it? Taking these games that have loyalty and have a tribe, and literally just trying to renew, not even rework. It's just renewing that magic, really.
Well, and thank you. You used the word timeless, and timeless is a great, great word, which, if you don't mind, I'm going to steal from you and use,
No, that's it.
And the point is that PlayStation, when I did an interview, they said, we've been going 25 years. And I said, Broken Sword's been on PlayStation for 24 years. So they said, so what's it going to be like in 25 years' time? And I kind of looked and thought, well, maybe maybe a fourth generation. We've had 3 generations playing Broken Sword. Why not a fourth? Imagine that in 25 years' time. Yes. And, there are some brands, particularly Nintendo, where you've got 3 generations, but not very many. Yeah. Most get forgotten about. So I'm very proud of the fact that we have, such a passionate and a wonderful audience. And it's always a real pleasure meeting them.
Wonderful meeting you as well. And Charles, you said, in your talk, it was about that path and a couple of things that went south, So what were some of the lessons, or maybe some of the surprises? Because it's great that you have what you have, and you're obviously so intertwined with it. It's making me feel like you and the game. It's sort of like it's one and the same. It's that feeling, and I admire that. But learnings are also important. What can you share? A couple of surprises, maybe even a couple of nightmares that we can all learn from.
I'll give you a couple of nightmares, actually, because there were plenty.
I mean,
where do I start? The first was that back in 1996, when the game was first released on PC, it would go into retail, and every game would go into retail, and you'd be fighting for one of the slots, which I don't know, maybe 200 or 300 or whatever. And if you got in, then the game would be there for 6 months, and then it would go to budget, and then it would be discounted, and that was it. It would never turn up. So we absolutely knew for sure there was really no point in keeping any of the assets. Like, why would you bother? Yeah. So being grown up, we did put them onto a tape, but then kind of forgot about them. They went into a warehouse and got a bit moldy. So, as I say, we knew that we were never going to need to get any of this data until we did.
Until you did.
And I can tell you, trying to get data off a format that that existed 25 years ago and nobody's heard of since is really, really hard. But the worst was we managed to get data from some of the CDs that had been burnt, and that was fine. But the most sort of upsetting thing is that the voices were really, really well done, and they were compressed to 11 kilohertz, and we didn't have the originals because our publisher, Virgin Interactive, had done all the work, and they provided us with the already compressed speech. So they are gone. They're gone forever. And we used a tool middle of last year to enhance them, and some of the qualities were so low that it was really bad, and it came out pretty bad. It was only marginally improved. Then at the end of last year, after we'd released the game, we found the next generation of tool, which actually does a much better job. So we were able to update the speech files, and people are delighted because it sounds so much better. Mm-hmm. But of course, in our hearts, we're going, imagine what the reception would have been had we not had this weakness of poor quality audio. The other thing is that, the release seemed from the outside to go so smoothly.
Unless you're inside.
So inside.
It's a different story.
Yeah. So basically we had got a lot of really fantastic coverage from PlayStation, and we promised that it was going to be released on the 19th of September. Uh-oh. We knew that we had to get approval from Steam, but it was a formality, and they said it will take 7 days, but we knew it would only take 1 or 2 days.
Right.
So 10 days before the release date, we submit it. 7 days later, we go, guys, can you just confirm that it's approved? Actually, we've rejected it. But you can appeal, and it'll take another 7 days. It's like, what? They rejected it because they said it was too similar to another game. The other game being the low-res version of Broken Sword that was already on the Steam. And it's like, oh my God. So it meant that we weren't going to get codes, and we couldn't delay the release because these companies are like juggernauts. You can't stop it. The release date was set in stone. And it meant that we weren't going to have codes for our backers, which is the cardinal sin. I mean, can you imagine? You've backed it, you've paid £100 or £200 or whatever, and you don't even get the game when it releases. And it's like, this is a car crash. And it's like, oh my God. So we went back, and thankfully I've got a contact in Steam. And I wrote her a very courteous email. And I said, I'd be really grateful if you could address this as soon as possible, please, because otherwise we're going to have to release, and it would be really embarrassing for us if it didn't come out on Steam. And we worked absolutely round the clock to try and get the console sorted out. And literally, Steam came back and approved it the day before release. And literally, we got the codes the day of release.
So I have chosen the right place for this. This is almost like a suspense, It is.
But then we worked with a terrific company called Pledge Manager, and they had to get the codes onto the Pledge Manager accounts. Now they're based on the East Coast, so you've got the time difference, and I didn't get them until I think 6 o'clock UK time or 7 o'clock UK time. And it was extraordinary that I got them at all, because obviously but these guys, it was like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's like, they'll have gone home. So what I had to do was I just had to send it saying, I really hope there's somebody there, because the game was, then going to release. And bless him, the account manager, he wasn't, and I sent him a few messages, and I went to bed and went, the next morning, they were all there. He'd done it.
We love him. We love you.
We do.
We do. We really do.
We can't mention it, but we can say very nice things about Pledge Manager.
We can indeed. Those are some really practical learnings about what goes into this. What was a surprise in the learnings? This is the practical. This is the nuts and bolts that tells you that you maybe you need to think about your assets and your legacy and what you have, because you'll be dipping back into it at some point in the game.
Yeah. But I think that's obvious now. But
it's obvious now.
But in 1996, it really wasn't.
No.
It really wasn't.
No.
The other thing is that we found that the game released in 1996 on PC, and I had been approached by a gentleman called Phil Harrison, who phoned me up. I'd known him because he was this lanky guy who kept looking for work when I was head of development at Activision. And I gave him a few projects, and that was fine. And he phoned me up and he said, look, I'm now working for Sony, and we've got this new console that we're developing. It's top secret, called PSX. Would you like to come and have a look? So, I'll come and have a look. Thank you very much. And you may remember they had the dinosaur, if you're remember that time, the dinosaur in 3D, and everybody was absolutely blown away. So I tried to convince Sony that actually they should do Broken Sword. And everybody said, no. We want 3D visceral games. We don't want point-and-click adventures. Anyway, our publisher, Virgin, turned it down flat. So I went to PlayStation and I said, look, there's this opportunity, and they weren't very excited. But in the end, they agreed. And they actually gave us a very good deal because they didn't think it was going to sell anything. And, the game, what happened? We didn't have a community at that stage, because this is the game had only just released. The first Broken Sword had only just released on PC.
Okay. All right.
And what happened was that the press was phenomenal. We got 9 out of 10s, extended coverage. But what was extraordinary was that at that time, there was a magazine called the Official PlayStation Magazine that cost £5, which was a lot of money. And it cover mounted 5 or 6 games. And people would spend, these kids would buy the magazine. It was expensive, and they would play all of those games to death. we were cover mounted, which none of the publishers realized quite how extraordinary this opportunity
getting
was.
Featured back in the day, right?
Exactly, because we got cover mounted on the UK, sadly not the American, the UK, German and French and Australian cover mounts. So literally millions of people got to play the game. And we still carry forward that legacy, that DNA of PlayStation, which is one of the reasons why I got to meet the PlayStation team. And I found that they all loved Broken Sword. And we worked with a terrific couple of agencies who knew Sony very well. And, this was only made possible through them. But because of their love of Broken Sword, I was able to get fantastic support from PlayStation. And that's, I guess, the other learning. If you have somebody on your side in one of these companies, make the most of it if you possibly can, because, it works for them because they know the game's going to be good and they love the game and they'll support it. And so it's very much a win-win.
Final question is, with something, it's almost like a legacy. It's almost your duty to be true to the game, but also to a new generation as well. Third generation going into fourth. That's incredible. And we hear so much about how you have to change, but not too much, because you're going to lose your community, and the community is everything. And but you still have to move. So you have that change it, but don't change it. How did you handle that balance there?
Well, that's a great question. So you may remember when Monkey Island reinvented itself and they changed the art style. And I know exactly what happened. There was an art.
Like Marmite, it was love it or hate
yeah,
it.
Exactly. But the art director obviously must have turned around and said, guys, this is very old fashioned. This is what people want. And it was a disaster. I mean, we launched Broken Sword on iOS at about the same time as Monkey Island. And, our Metacritic was 91% and theirs was way, way, way down, and, they had all the money in the world and we had none whatsoever. But what we'd focused on was the UI and the gameplay experience. And what they'd focused on was updating the art style. So it's quite clear that what people want is the same, but better. And so with Broken Sword, what I love doing is giving people the new version, and they go, yeah, I remember. I did this actually with some of the guys at Microsoft, and Chris Charla, who was a fan. He's the head of ID at Microsoft, and he looked at me and went, I remember this. It's great. And I went, no. This is what it looked like. You press 1, and it jumps from the 4K version back to the low-res version. And people are just blown away. You see the wonderful smile on their faces because what they're seeing in 4K is what they remember it as. But then you show what it really looked like. So we changed. The rule was we would change stuff that I would be prepared to stand up and justify, because the person who wrote it was very progressive. So we found that we had very, very few issues with regards to modern day sensibilities, which is great. Yeah. But there were a number of continuity issues that I've kind of been irritating me for 30 years, and finally I could fix them.
What was one of them? I'm curious.
One of them is that the game starts with a clown putting an accordion on a stool and then running out, and that blows up. And then when you get to the game screen, when you come back to that game screen, the bomb blast is in the center of the room rather than the stool. And the stool that he put and it sounds trivial and nobody noticed, but adventure game players are smart and they're looking for the logic. Yeah. So it'll make another thing is that the clown, you discover that it's a guy called Khan, and he's got the reason he put makeup on is because he's got a scar on his face. And you find his jacket, and from his jacket you get to the tailor, and from the tailor you find out the hotel. And that's fine. But when you next see him, he's wearing these strange trousers, but he's wearing a purple jacket. And then he comes into the hotel room and he puts on the purple trousers and goes out wearing purple. And so, when did he change? He's just come back. He's lost his jacket, but he's come back. And again, nobody noticed, but
the fans do.
But it creates a sense of uncertainty. Yeah. And the other one, if I'm going to be totally honest, is I met a wonderful Syrian journalist. This was before the terrible, terrible war. And he came bouncing over and he said, I'm so excited you feature Syria. It's such a pleasure to have Syria in the game. And I go, oh, I'm really pleased. But there's one particular character that I feel is a little bit of a stereotype and I'm a bit embarrassed. He said, oh, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But it kind of did to me because it feels like a sort of 1940s depiction. And again, it was lovely. Just little tiny changes to the animation, tiny changes to the face. Nobody noticed, but I did. And it was not patronizing in the way. And that was only one example. there are only two examples. There's another one where when our heroine, Nico, is tied up and the hero, George, can kiss her when she's tied up. And, a couple of her expressions just feel a little bit out of place. And so we just simply cut it back. And I don't think anybody noticed and I don't think anybody cared. But it just allowed us to bring the game up to date very, very subtly. And, so I would feel very proud for anybody to play it because it doesn't, the funny thing is that it does have a T rating, which is ludicrous. It's being judged much harder than the film would because there's nothing offensive in there at all. But the point is that I'm very confident that anybody who plays it, whether you're, a young adult a young teen or whoever, it's like it's like a PG. It's like an Indiana Jones. It's as violent as an Indiana Jones in that people do occasionally get shot, but there's no gratuitous violence. It's part of the story.
So it's all about the story. That's what we always hear. And that's why it's so exciting to speak with you because you're proving that narrative matters, which we all know, but we need to be reminded of that. I think that's something in the game space. We really need to be reminded that it's the story, it's the narrative, it's the game. We get a bit lost in all of this. Just curious because been there, done that, Charles, obviously. AI, where does that leave you? It is part of life. Totally get it. And we're going to have to be prompt engineers. We're going to have to understand and supervise AI, perhaps.
I would agree with
where
you completely.
where are you on that with your own work?
I'm very pragmatic. We did explore using AI, but ultimately, when we had tiny little sprites, and we needed to put an enormous amount of detail into them, and human beings are much better at putting emotion into human characters than an AI is.
Oh,
so ultimately, we had a wonderful team of very talented animators, and they worked very hard. And we used, we did experiment, of course, with the backgrounds. But again, what we actually did, wherever we could, is go back to the originals and repaint from scratch. So I'm ambivalent about AI. Clearly going through and taking other people's copyrighted material and benefiting from it financially is of dubious morality. I do think that if you train AI on your own data, then that is quite legitimate. Yes. And it is a tool. Ultimately, we did use a little bit of it because the job of taking characters and drawing the lines around the outside is so tedious. So we got a little bit of help with some of that. But it was no different to to a Photoshop tool. Yeah. It was just a Photoshop tool. But we absolutely have never and would never have used other people's AI in terms of training data. Mm-hmm. But it is here to stay, and with with the new president of the United States, I think that any safeguards I think are probably going to be ignored by the great Doge man himself, and we just wait and see.
Well, I give you that one. When you think about all the technology minds that are part of this, attending the inauguration, you see where this is going. It's extraordinary. We never had that in our history before. But there's probably something good about it. I'll think about that because I'm always an optimist. And as I said, we have our sort of our drama. We have our theater here. So we have the theater of the mind, I think is what I'll think about here, Charles. Give me an ending then. Your thoughts on 2025. It feels very optimistic. I've been talking with a lot of people who are much more positive than they were 1 or 2 years ago. What's your take on it?
Well, I think we're still 4 or 5 years ago was incredible, because the biggest companies in the world, literally the Apples and the Microsofts and the Amazons, were fighting, and they needed content. So it was an extraordinary period. And the corporate finance people got involved, and they pumped money in. And then when the pandemic ended and the industry dropped, still above what it had been, because we're on an upward trajectory, they then pulled all the money out, which is such a shame, because they should have realized that it was going to come back down again. I feel it's been very mismanaged by many of those people. Yeah. And of course, a huge number of people have lost their jobs, and that's terribly, terribly sad. I am not as optimistic for 2025. Certainly last year, people were saying, just survive to 25. And my answer was, what makes you think that 25, we're never going to get back to how it was in 2020, or, we're just not, not for a generation, because, you look at the money that Xbox was putting into the industry, into indie developers, it was crazy. So I think in many ways, and this is an incredibly selfish thing to say, but I'm going to say it. We launched Broken Sword, Shadow of the Templars Reforged on the 19th of September last year. Any other year, that would have been a terrible, terrible idea, because there would have been so many games up against us. Last year, with the market much more normalized, it was the perfect time to release, because we could build up some momentum for Christmas. We didn't have, a plethora of other games. And so in many ways, and that's not to in any way gloss over the terrible human cost, but the market was very, very distorted. And when a market is distorted, horrible things go wrong, as they have done. I think it's much better to be normalized and write games that sell to people. And if, that's how you have to do it. That's how we've always had to do it. And obviously NFTs came along, and they were clearly nonsense. And now people are saying, oh, well, no, maybe it was a mistake. Well, it was obviously a mistake, because it's complete and utter nonsense. I'm not enormously happy with loot boxes, I have to say. And, we're just very naive. We write games that people buy or they don't buy. And if they do buy, we do well. And if they don't buy, we go bankrupt. It's as simple as that. And, we're kind of returning to that normality, which, may or may not be a good thing. But for us, it is good.
But I hear it. It's, when it's a normal time, then you have a normal state of competition. So you know what you're up against. The hype is gone. The game stands or falls on its merits, on its community, and on your fabulous work, Charles. It's such a pleasure to have met you, and I see exactly why the Pocket Gamer team said, talk to Charles at the end of the day. He will give you the footnote of the industry. Absolutely. May I say, it was a pleasure, Peggy. Charles.
Lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you for putting up with me.
Love it. And of course, if you're tuning into In the Groove on YouTube, well, go ahead and smash that subscribe button. It will allow you to stay up to date with the series, and not only that, enjoy the pure gold of knowledge and insights our guests bring to every episode.